So let's talk about one of the most incredible acts of social engineering in all of history, the Pact of Brotherhood. It's really the story of how a community, right on the brink of collapse, literally forged a nation out of nothing.
All right, let's just start with a question. Imagine this. How do you build a home, a whole society, when half your people show up as refugees with, nothing but the clothes on their backs? Well, that was the reality in 7th century Medina. It was a city of strangers, facing a challenge that honestly should have torn them apart. But instead, it became the foundation of their greatest strength.
To really get the genius of what they did, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the problem they were facing. This city was under an immense, almost impossible amount of pressure.
So on one hand, you had the Muhajiroon. These were the migrants who had to flee persecution in Mecca. They were, for all intents and purposes, destitute. They'd left everything behind. And on the other hand, you had the Ansaar, the local helpers. They were the established residents of Medina. They had homes, farms, a whole way of life that was suddenly being turned upside down by this huge wave of newcomers. It was a perfect recipe for social chaos.
And what's really fascinating is that Medina wasn't some unified, peaceful city to begin with. The local Ansar were made up of different tribes, like the Aus and the Khazraj, who, if you look at the historical records, had this long, bloody history of fighting each other. So the challenge wasn't just about integrating refugees. It was also about healing these deep, old wounds that were already there inside the community itself.
So, you've got a divided city, you've got a massive refugee crisis. A conventional solution just wasn't going to cut it. What happened next was, well, it was truly radical.
It was called the Mu'aha, or the Pact of Brotherhood. Now, this wasn't some vague suggestion to be nice to each other. No, this was a formal, deliberate, systematic policy. The Prophet paired up one migrant family with one local family, and then declared them brothers. Not like brothers, actually truly brothers in the deepest sense of the word.
And this whole action was rooted in this powerful new idea, captured right here in this verse from the Quran. It basically established that your primary identity was no longer your tribe or where you came from, but your shared faith. And this new spiritual bond, well, it was about to be tested in the most practical ways you can possibly imagine.
Words are one thing, of course, but actions are something else entirely. So let's look at how this incredible pact actually played out in everyday life, forging a bond that would completely redefine what family even means.
The generosity of the Ansar was just staggering. They went to the Prophet and offered to literally divide their most valuable assets, their date palm orchards, right down the middle and just give half to their new brothers. This wasn't just, charity. This was a complete reordering of their entire economy based on brotherhood. But this is what's so beautiful. It shows the other side of the equation, dignity. The Muhajiroon refused to just become dependent and take handouts. Instead, they came back with a counterproposal, a partnership. They essentially said, look, you keep your property, but let us do the work in the gardens and we'll split the profits. They insisted on contributing, on earning their way, establishing this principle of self-reliance from day one.
This whole spirit, this whole vibe was known as Isar, which is this beautiful concept of selfless generosity. It's the act of putting others first, even when you yourself are in need. It's about putting your brother's hunger before your own.
And that spirit was so profound, so real, that it was actually immortalized right here in the Quran. This verse came down in direct praise of what the Ansar were doing, making their self-sacrifice a timeless example for their entire community. It showed that true brotherhood means you actually bear each other's burdens.
And it went even further than that. And this part is just wild. Initially, this bond was so legally binding that these new brothers would inherit from each other even over their own blood relatives. Now, this was a temporary but incredibly powerful measure designed to cement these new family units. It was a shock to the system on purpose. And then, once the community stabilized and the Muhajiroon were back on their feet, the ruling was updated and inheritance went back to blood relatives. It was an extraordinary tool for an extraordinary time.
So, you have these radical acts of generosity, of dignity, of sacrifice. What was the long-term result of all this? Well, it was nothing less than the foundation of a new civilization.
The Quran itself gives us this stunning metaphor for what happened. The community was like a seed which sends forth its shoot, then makes it strong, and it stands straight on its stem. Through this system of mutual mercy and support, a fragile community of refugees and locals grew into something strong, resilient, and totally self-sustained.
The depth of the love and the trust that was forged in this period it's breathtaking. The Prophet himself described the Ansar as his Karishah.
his inner garment. That's a term for your absolute closest confidants, the people you entrust with everything. This wasn't just political praise, it was a declaration of deep, intimate, familial love.
And this was the ultimate result. Out of division, they created unity. Out of poverty, they created shared prosperity. Out of a city of strangers, they created one family. It really proves a timeless principle. Without unity, a country just cannot prosper. The Pact of Brotherhood was the engine that turned all these scattered individuals into a single, cohesive nation, ready to face whatever came next, together.
This whole remarkable story from over 1,400 years ago really leaves us with a profound and pretty urgent question for our own time. What is the true foundation of unity? Is it, a shared border, a common language? Or, as the Pact of Brotherhood suggests, is it something much deeper, a radical commitment to mutual dignity, to selfless sacrifice, and to a shared purpose that can transcend every other difference?